And most people are coming in. We're waiting for one more panelist, but he was on a quick bathroom break. So I'm going to start with the introduction. He has seen this already. Right. So welcome at panel 1B, and there's also our fourth panelist. Great to have you. Let's get started. So what we're gonna discuss here today with these four men, and I'll be chairing, is how can we create impact with professional analytics support at nonprofits. So I will do a really brief introduction, then I will give the floor to these guys. They will introduce their work and their lessons learned in 25 minutes, and then we will open up the floor for first for Q&A from the audience, also online, and then maybe if needed also some discussion points. So we have Boy from Ortec, who collaborated with Bouke from 510. Well, Bouke you've also seen earlier in the talk downstairs. Then we have Maarten, who's from AMREF, who is working on monitoring and evaluation, and we're also happily collaborating with Maarten. And at last, Stijn from C-Motions, who is also supporting nonprofits for quite a long time already, even before ABW existed. So we're also very happy to have him in this panel. So I showed you this triangle, so I'm not going to walk through it too long, but this part of this panel will focus on these two and the interaction between these two actors, so with nonprofits and with businesses, as you can see also, which are represented in the panel. The screen is really slow. That's better. That also means that we are focusing on both on knowledge sharing that we are stimulating as Analytics for a Better World, and on analytics implementation. So the research part is here out of scope, and it's a bit more covered downstairs and also in the session, for example, by Hein, which is the coming panel after this. Then I would like to give the floor, I think, first to you, Boy, or is first to Bouke, right? I hope the clicker is right.
Okay. Yes, so I'm Bouke, I'm from 510, just like Bessel, who just spoke downstairs. Yes, okay, so Robert actually removed the introduction from my slides of 510, because Bessel already did it. But one thing he didn't tell yet is that we started actually as the Data and Digital Initiative of the Netherlands Red Cross in 2016. Which is not so long ago yet. And actually, so it started with just 3 people mainly doing all the work. And we have quickly grown into quite a big group. We work a lot with professional volunteers. So that we have like 70, 80 volunteers per year contributing. And we have at the moment around 30 or 40 staff. So there was quite a big peak or a strong curve with new people and more projects. And that also gave some issues.
Shall I?
Yeah. So some of the issues that we faced are mentioned here. So we had a lot of projects with different kind of data sets, different kind of models that were run. We use different kind of cloud resources, mostly in Azure, but depending on the person doing the project, there would be a different setting. So data gathering was ad hoc. We were also running projects where results can be politically sensitive, as Westel also mentioned this afternoon already. Stability of data is sometimes an issue, also where it is stored, sometimes on a local computer or in Google Drive. Sometimes it was stored in Teams or maybe in a storage account in Azure. As mentioned, we work with volunteers that come and go. Data is hardly shared between projects, meaning that when a new project starts, we actually had to start again with, okay, what kind of data do we have on population in Uganda, for example? And then we know, oh wait, we use this in another project, but where is this data? And what's the details about it? So a lot of these typical things, I think, in a growing organization that, well, we start with just doing things, how it's going, and then you grow, and then you want to get a bit more efficient. Next slide, please. So then we started talking to Robert and some people from Ortec, and we identified 4 areas where we were going to look at specifically how we could be more efficient. First one is how to transfer our models or applications to local Red Cross or Red Crescent societies. Second is how we can make more efficient use of cloud resources resourced in the cloud and more cost effective. Just take a sip of water. Third, how to control the use of data and models to reduce the risks and increase traceability of our data through models. We actually also have some applications that are quite critical that they keep running. For example, when we try to forecast a flood, and there's a pipeline running every day, and we want to make sure that it keeps running and that we don't see after a month, oh hey, last month already for a time we didn't have the model running, because then people will not be notified when there is actually a disaster coming. And fourth, how to increase the impact by reusing data, reusing also maybe also models, and improve the scalability in these groups. Next slide, please. So I will say a bit more about 2 of those. So the last one, reuse. So what we did is we set up, or we got advice from Ortec, and then together we set up a common data architecture for the whole organization with a data lake and a data catalog. So data would be more findable, and also there was a good structure of how data would flow through our applications. Boy will say a bit more about that. Yeah, so some of the outcomes were that, so we set up the different components in Azure. We set up the access rights and the protocols on how to use them, and also discussed about roles and responsibilities. Next slide. The other one, efficient use of cloud resources. Together with Ortec, we did an analysis of all the resources that we had in the cloud, or in Azure specifically, and we found out actually quite a lot of ways how we can reduce the cost. Some things were more on, okay, when we set up a new project, we could do some things differently, so it would be using less computing power or less resources, but there were also some things that were actually easily just to delete some resources that were kind of standards in Azure, but not really useful in our use case, and actually cutting our costs by quite a bit. Yes, next slide. Yeah, you can hold this. I cannot do anything with it. So.
Thanks. The speakers took that delivered. Yes, I want to talk a little bit more about one of the impacts that we made for 510, especially the first one Bauke discussed about the data architecture, creating a unified system, creating common language, common tooling within the organization for everyone to just get used and be using the same standards and deliver their projects effectively. Bit of a disclaimer, I'm a tech guy, so this is a bit of a techie thing. I'll go over it as quickly as possible, but like Pravati mentioned downstairs as well, I can get lost and I can talk about this all day, but I won't today. I'll just give you the quick overview. Yes. So some of the challenges Bauke mentioned were found in everyone doing their own thing on the cloud, everyone creating their own projects, everyone using the resources and their own knowledge, especially if you have a broad level or beyond different volunteers, they have different knowledge levels, they know different tools. So what you'll see in your projects, the projects that you're doing, is you'll deviate a lot in the tools, the technologies, the architectures that you're using. We came about and we did a lot of interviews with the volunteers currently running projects. And what we did is we tried to investigate the greatest common divisor between those. What do projects in the sense of 510 minimally need in order for it to be a project? And how do we standardize that as much as possible? What we came about was this image we have here, wherein it contains lots of items. But a clear distinction that should be made here is that we try to investigate different roles for 510. When you're delivering a project, you need to have different focuses for different roles, profiles, people with certain knowledge. And you see them here in sort of the coloring, so to speak. You have more like the architecture, the engineering roles that you will need to get the data delivered, have that shaped in a right format. And then you have the application that's built on top of it. ADA that we discussed just yet was a perfect example of how we delivered the full application where we combined the engineering piece, the whole pipelining piece that Wessel spoke about, together with the end application where they're now delivering a UI. So that's a perfect example of how that fits within the architecture that we're using. We have sort of a technical piece that we worked on. But using the technical components, we also need, of course, a human component. So we can advise on, and this is one of the images that I like, contains lots of tools, technologies that I won't bug you with. The important part is that 510, where people come together with different levels of knowledge, they know different tools, they have different specifications. How can we get them to use these tools? How can we get them to use the different components that we advise them to have? And how can we get them to be involved here? Apart from the tools here, and I'm happy to speak about more in the break, we did that by two different methods we came up with, one of which were the Azure reference cards that were listed in the middle. So the main data platform, the main technology we use or is used by 510 throughout Microsoft Azure. So what we decided to bring is have low-level reference cards explaining what components do, how should you best use them, do you actually need them? Not all components are always needed. And most importantly for us, how to securely use them in the context of the project that you're running. So we try to bring different examples and different best practices to the team to get everyone up to speed using on-demand reading material. But that's not the only thing that we did on the operational side. We introduced on the operational side. On the next slide, you'll see an overview of different roles that we specified or that we advise to specify within the 510 team. And it's currently, if I'm correct, it's being implemented as we speak, wherein we see instead of everyone just doing everything, everyone being involved in different projects, we advise them, hey, try to be a bit more centralized and try to have a monitoring aspect involved where different roles do monitoring overarchingly on projects. And then you have the different project teams that can still do what they like best, do their analytics. Well, it remains sustainable and while you can grow in the number of projects that you do. So different roles were defined. I won't go into all of the details here, but this is something, the organizational chart is something that we're on top of this, we wanted to educate or to have everyone use the different tools that we advise them to use. We want to educate the project teams on how should you actually use the different tools that you're about to apply in the projects that you're using. On the next slide, I'll show 3 different roles that we defined there, considering the responsibilities that I talked about earlier. So we have engineers, analysts, and data stewards. People linked to how to get the data in, shape it in the right format, how to analyze the data, do your analytics, and then how to monitor the data as well. Is the data of sufficient quality? Are we actually doing the right thing with the data and our access rights properly? We split those up in different trainings, and we facilitated the training, or we facilitated the training curriculum at the 510 team as Ortec to really get them up to speed on what they're doing. We started that off by a data architecture ABC, which is one generalized training for the whole 510 team, explaining everything that well, you should know regardless of the role that you're having. There were
Which is
on
not
demand.
this session, by the way.
What's it?
Which is not this session.
Which
by
is
the
not
way.
this session. It contains the same number of details. We went into a couple more details on the platform, but really on how to use it and why should you be using it? Why should we care? There were on-demand trainings on Azure fundamentals, so really ensuring that everyone has a technical basis of how to use the data architecture. And then we had the specialization session. So with this, we try to organize the knowledge, not only on a technical way. Like I mentioned, I'm a tech guy, I like to implement these things, but also to get everyone involved here. Yeah, and these are the components that we as Ortec mainly contributed to the 510 team over the years. When I hand it over back to, you get the clicker again. I want to hand it over to Bouke to reflect a little bit on the impacts we made and where are open challenges.
Yes. Yeah, okay, so first of all, this relates directly to what Boy just said. The trainings, it was quite a huge increase of level of knowledge about Azure for the whole team. Actually, some of these trainings, we got the training material and then we actually repeated some of them. And this was also, nice thing was also not, it was not just a training, but because we had a certain methodology, for example, to set up a pipeline, people started doing the same thing when they would build a pipeline, and that also ensured that we would increase the level of the pipeline building in that sense together. Yeah, well, we have much more efficient use of cloud resources. Already mentioned, we merged database servers. We set up schedules for VMs to turn off at certain point of times. These kind of sometimes easy things made quite some differences. We also made reservations for things that we would use for multiple years. Now to challenges. One of the challenges is actually about these roles and responsibilities. We have actually already talked about it quite a lot in the team, but it's more than just giving a role to someone or discussing this needs to happen. It's actually also a bit of a culture change in the organization, and especially with a young and growing organization, this appeared to be quite a big challenge. People really like to be flexible and to do whatever they find easy to do, which also works for a lot of projects, but not for all of them. And that's still a challenge too. So that's something indeed we're still working on to try to standardize things a bit more and maybe formalize how to make new things. No, that's actually the last one. What's the third one? New stuff and oh yeah. So a lot of the so actually all the work we don't do for ourselves, but we do it for national societies somewhere around the world, sometimes actually also in the Netherlands. But then the people we work with, they mostly don't have the same level of knowledge. So it is actually a challenge to the way we do things, and we've learned new things to improve our analytics. Sometimes it's actually raising the gap even more with the people we work with. And also, if we have new staff, that's another chance to bring them to the same level. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Want to continue directly?
Yeah, we're gonna do them all and then.
Thanks, Bouke and Boyd, because I just prepared some slides looking for a position, just not to. That hopefully relates to Bouke and Boyd's discussion, because they maybe are an example of a successful collaboration between Ortec and 510. And actually, the problems that Bouke was facing on the first slide is very recognizable with the kind of problems that we are facing. And we as AMREF Health Africa, or in the Netherlands, we are called Amr Flying Doctors. We are an African-based health organization, headquartered in Kenya, and having another 8 offices across Africa. And I think we claim to be the largest health organization in Africa. And it has multiple northern offices that are basically fundraising offices, like here in the Netherlands, where we are based in Leiden. And my role in the Netherlands is I'm a monitoring evaluation advisor, looking over programs, larger multinational programs, understanding what are we doing and could it be done better and where is it for? So I'm in the department, so what? And in the past years, we have been engaging a lot also with and not only Ortec, but also with Amsterdam Data Collective, Eliane here, who has also helped me out in figuring out the 3 lessons learned. So instead of having a technical presentation, I'm trying to look into the relationships between non-profits and data science companies. Yeah, thanks. And we have boiled down into 3 points: building a good relationship, working together, and repeat. And then on the first, there is always a first love because we share the ambition to achieve sustainable development goals together. So there's also always a start of a common ground there between non-profits and data companies. But these companies, these 2 parties are quite different from each other. And it takes some time, or you need to spend and invest time in understanding from mutual ways to understand what the other is doing and where is the added value of the other. Not only from the company towards the non-profit, but also vice versa from the non-profit into the company. And it makes sense to do a deep dive or do a safari into the other company to understand what are they doing and where is the added value of them in our organization. That is all well and nice, but it also is very nice, I think, to add a pretty critical assessment on what are you doing and where is the added value of a data company into my non-profit. So we have experiences where it was Ortec actually, where they do a pretty thorough assessment of the projects that you're working on, what you prioritize as being urgent, and where you think that there's an added value of Ortec and how they value that added value in relation to other projects. So a lot of interviews, a lot of critical questions asked so that they have a good assessment on, okay, there is some added value in our support for these particular projects. So it's really, so our 2 recommendations here is to give the relationship time and to also have relationship managers at both sides, not only on the tech side, but also really managing the relationship and also do that the critical assessments. And then on the second part is that work together. And I think Bauke already showed some challenges there, is that the NGO typically works different than a data company. We work in speaking from Amr, we sit in Leiden, but the work is actually being done by my African colleagues in complete different circumstances than me in Leiden, with a different hierarchy and culture, office culture. The workplace is different, priorities are different, the responses are not always be understood. So there's a lot of challenges in working together efficiently. And there are many risks along that road to being put up at each other because the other doesn't deliver, basically. It doesn't really matter who's not delivering, but there. So to avoid this, I think the recommendation here is to try to, and maybe that's what Boy and Bauke did, I can't tell, but to compose a team really consisting out of people from the NGO and consisting out of the data company that together share the responsibility of delivering a certain end result at the end of a project period. And the other thing is also, it attacks also another problem or a challenge, which is that the help here or assistance is being received for free to the non-profit, which makes that the non-profit is maybe over-enthusiastic in accepting the support, but cannot always deliver towards the promise of giving the data or giving in their time, because it's receiving assistance from a data company is not always it's not for free for non-profit. They have to invest time and resources themselves as well to accept and to absorb the assistance. So it's both ways. It's also, and it has to do also with the critical assessment. It's good to also for the non-profit, but also for the data company to dare to say no when you think you can't deliver, or when you think the assistance is actually not addressing the issue at hand, which is very tempting not to do when that services are for free. Sorry. Yeah. So that's a key takeaway there. And maybe also there composing a team pushes both parties to certain commitments that they will critically rethink before they make themselves available for the team effort. So make it a team effort. And the third point, which is on a repeat, is that, and it's also something that is one of the problems or the challenges that Bauke introduced in his first slide, is that NGOs typically were project-based, and you can have a solution for a certain project, but what will happen when the project dies down afterwards? So what are you going to do with that solution delivered after that project? The nature of those NGOs will not change very quickly, so you have to make sure that you have an answer to that project-based environment that the NGO is working in with your solutions. So it has to do with open source that can be scaled or replicated. It makes sense maybe to not only provide this tool, but train the staff, and hopefully it retains in future projects where these program people are being working in. And I was thinking this over a couple of days ago, and I thought that actually in our cooperation, we do have a lot of cooperations between. So if you imagine, there's the mostly Dutch data company, there's the Dutch office of, in this case, Amrefat Africa, and there are the offices of Amrefat Africa in Africa who are actually dealing with the data and dealing with the work where the solution has to fit. But we don't so much involve a local data company if there's no absorption capacity at the local organization. So it may be an idea to think of, when you're looking for solutions, to embrace a local data company that has the skills already, or the basic skills at least, that is not sitting in the local NGO nor in Leiden, so that you have a higher guarantee that improvements that you're making or solutions that you're offering are sticking around somewhere. That's in a nutshell, Robert.
Really
a
good
couple
idea.
of relation lessons.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, last but not least, I try to keep it short so we can have some interaction as well in the panel today. I'm Stijn, I'm working for Seamotions, a data company around for about 20 years, specifically on data-driven working, data-driven marketing, and creating a better future with data. And that's what I want to focus on right now, on a better future and on to create, because it's easy to create a one-off project or an experiment to do smart stuff with data, but how can we make it sustainable in an organization and really help the data maturity increase? We usually take 3 steps: align, arrange, and accomplish. Accomplish is all the smart stuff we do with data. I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on align and arrange. And the first step is more trying to find out what the real benefit of data would be for an organization's objectives. So it's about data strategy. You can just click on. It's about matching the data strategy with the data identity of a company. So where do you want to match your data initiatives to your data culture, and find out what are the use cases that data can help you with. The data maturity scan was already mentioned in the meeting before. So it's about getting a feeling on what is the current maturity level of your organization on all elements, and try to get a balanced roadmap to bring all these 4 elements to a higher level. So it's on getting analysts to the next level and make sure that the technology is right. But what about the culture and what about the business people that you need to work with? So it needs to be balanced and take steps in the same speed. I'm going to share some learnings from our experience with the nonprofit organizations that we have worked with and that we are working with right now. This is just our, let's say, the way we solve it. So as you can see, we work with a lot of Dutch-based organizations, but also with Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières. We did a data maturity scan for 25 local fundraising teams across the globe to see how they can work together more, what Finland can learn from what they're doing in Brazil, or what Luxembourg can learn from what they're doing in Taiwan, to make their understanding of data maturity a bit more clear and see how they can work together across all the different fundraising teams. So the learnings from all these projects are summarized in the slides. So first I'd like to share some learnings on culture and data identity. And the cool, the cool thing is working with nonprofit organizations for our people as well is their immense intrinsic motivation and engagement with the cause. We also work with banks and with insurance companies and with government, but working with people in nonprofit organizations is for our people is the best thing in the world because they are so engaged. But this engagement also comes with a bit of a downside because there's a bit of fear that data will be used, let's say, to commercialize their business, to work on KPIs and with dashboards, and that's what you want to prevent. So you want to keep this positive enthusiasm for the cause and add data in the mix to make it even better. So that's an important learning when you want to work with data for nonprofits. And another one is that there's a huge obligation to work in an ethical way and ensure the well-being of the beneficiaries. We work with a lot of healthcare funds. It's really important to know that the patients that they're working for are treated well, that their data is treated well, and that we are very transparent about that. And so that's a learning on culture. I think that's 3 again. Being a data analyst, I think it's 3. So on the strategy side, we see that data and being data driven is in all long-term plans for non-profit organizations, as long as you don't call it data driven. So it's patient-centric or customer-centric or whatever. Don't call it data driven because then you have to explain why it's called data driven and not why it's beneficial to the cause. But there's also a huge gap between the ambition that is in policies and in plans and in long-term plans and the execution. So make sure that there's alignment between your management team and the different specialists that you have in your organization. And finally, on ability to execute, there's another one. Oh, yeah. So in our experience, campaign-based working, doing big campaigns to communicate about the cause of an organization, that's like 5-star rating. So all these specialists are really good in doing that. But that's just one-off. That's a big campaign on television or on other media. But also, let's say, yearly fundraising campaigns, they are super good in organizing that. But data is especially useful for continuous optimization. And that's a skill that needs to be improved in fundraising teams. Getting data to work better and better for you. And I really like the organizational chart of 510 for all these data roles. The organizations that we work with have 1 or 2 data people, and they have to do everything. And it's important to see how you can help them take the next steps and reduce the operational activities that they are doing. And Sue Ann here from Doctors Without Borders? Oh, so she's, yeah, she's downstairs, but that's an example of someone who can do so much more if she can automate certain tasks and get her attention to the stuff that really makes impact. So keep an eye on those people because they are really important. And you don't want to miss them because they don't feel that they have enough room to grow or have challenges in their professional work. And finally, data doesn't flow yet, so it's locked in separate files or separate systems, or my worst case scenario, everything in one system like the CRM, and try to do everything from there. So try to make your organization a bit more agile in the way that data is flowing through your organization and manage those data pipelines in a good way, like the technology that you're using as well. So that were my learnings. Let's go ahead and discuss a bit.
Open the floor. Yeah. Right, so I think we heard 3 very interesting stories, all from also different perspective. I did that on purpose. So we did we had a bit of technical deep dive and collaboration. We had more on the relationship side, and then now also more on the cultural aspects and collaboration. I want to open the floor here in the audience first, and also monitor the chat if possible. Do you have the chat, or do I connect? Okay, great. In the back.
Yeah, so a question for the last speaker. You mentioned we should not call our programs data-driven, right?
Yeah.
So what should we do?
I think it's important to emphasize the value of data that fits the cause of your organization. And sometimes it's let's say patient centricity, or sometimes it's optimization, but incorporate the effect that you would like to have with this data instead of saying it's data driven. And it's a small difference, but in the adoption, it can make a huge difference to have a successful program.
Can I say one thing? So for the humanitarian aid world, there's actually a big push for things to be more evidence-based. And actually that's data-driven can be a way to base things on evidence. So that could be for the humanitarian world, that could be a very good.
Yeah, it's all semantics, but it means the world for success. Yeah.
So on the other hand,
you mentioned, I think all of you, a little bit about the fact that we're working mostly with projects which finish eventually or rather soon. But one of the things that we experience quite a bit is that when we have the system already in place and the roles defined, and we start already using or supposed to be using the data and the information, that's when the project finishes. So then how do you hand over? How do you prepare for this? How do you make a sort of a long-term relationship? Would you, I don't know, expand some ideas on this a bit?
I of course mentioned it in my slides, and I think so for Amref, I think apart leaving alone the cooperation with the data companies, we are trying as a federation to work more on a pragmatic way, so that we have long-term goals, long-term understanding of the type of intervention that we want to do today or in the years to come to achieve a certain long-term goal, like the SDGs are, for example. But our funding is project-based, which means that it's an attempt to go there, but funding is mainly project-based for 4 or 3 or 5 years with specific goals and results, etc., on specific locations. So it's very hard to. So within that particular project of 5 years, I find after a year, and then I have only 4 or 3 years left, I have some data at my end. I need to use it for better decision making, etc. And by the time I have a solution, indeed, I run into the last year of my project. And the problem is that my funding ends, and the next funding cycle has a different location, has different types of results and indicators, and therefore I can't well, it's hard to then replicate that same solution. So either the solution should be adapted to the fact that it will be coming too late, for example, and has to be that's the next project, but that's for the solution. But at AMREF, I mean, we're not happy either, because that's what Bouk said. What's the evidence on the long term? What might change it? So apart from the whole data problem, I now have projects, you know, maybe successful projects, but in the end, what is the type of, you know, what kind of evidence do I have on long term in the achievement towards SDGs, for example? So I'd rather have a programmatic approach and a scalable intervention that in a longer history line gives me information about the type of change that I've brought about. And I think maybe that's for 510 it's different, or for Red Cross different, because it's always, I mean, I'm doing a wrong. There's always a hurricane hitting houses, for example, and it will be hitting houses in 10 years from now again, probably. And of course, the responses, etc., will differ, but you can predict the type of what you want to save human lives as soon as possible, probably. So that makes that there's a longer, you know, structural solution. It's worth investing in a structural solution, because it's the same intervention over a long period of time. Does it make sense?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I recognize what you're saying.
Maybe I can share this perspective that I found really on the 510 side, which were two of the causes that we actually started investigating, also the architecture you just saw. Because I think it ties really in with the project, the problem, you know, challenge you're facing, or you're explaining, is really on how to run those, make sure that those projects either stay on for a longer time. So you either maintain them, or you do some sort of handover along the way, such that the people that are using the project could still be continuing using it. I think those two ways are really some of the things we try to achieve in sort of introducing the architecture, which is to us at that moment, it meant doing a bit of standardization, ensuring not only budget-wise, you're having the funding to continue your project, but if the budget shrinks or it shrinks down, at least you can use a certain common knowledge, a common language to continue using the project. Or, which is one of the challenges that 510 is currently still facing. 510 is doing a lot of projects for national societies. So the damage assessment tool that was explained is really to assist what is happening locally. So eventually for such projects, damage assessment is a bit more granular. So it applies to multiple different locations. But if we have very specific models, and I don't really have examples, but Bouk can help me on that, they would really tie into a specific national society. And what you would preferably do in the long run is to do a handover to such a society, to have them pick the ownership and really have them continue the project, find the right funding to continue using the tool. And for that, I believe, well, from a technical perspective, you need to be prepared for that. So strategically, you need to set it up in such a way that people with limited knowledge, different infrastructure, different architectures can still use it. So those are all considerations to be picked up.
But I'm really impressed by the way that you set up the pipelines and the whole architecture to have a really short time to market when you have a new project. So standardization of stuff that can be repeated really helps to get the impact where you want to have the impact, and that is in using it, instead of taking a lot of time to prepare data. And well, it's the same for when it's fundraising, or what we do for the IKNL, which is the Dutch Cancer Research Society. They create data sets for cancer researchers, and they include the software to do this research in let's say, a virtual environment for them. And the faster you can get the data and the software available, the more time you can get the researchers to work with it. So if you can automate all those stuff, then you can spend all your time and money on creating impact instead of let's say, the stuff you need before you can start.
I have a question on dealing with sensitive data. So it was mentioned before that there might be some cases where there's sort of political sensitivity to the data. I'm not sure if there's an answer to this already in the room, but are there examples of using such forms of data for prescriptive analytics, and how would that be done in a way that's provides assurances to everyone involved that the data is secure?
Can I start? Okay, I can give you an example of a project that I'm running right now. It's with the Lung Fonds and the Lung Fund. They help lung patients. And what we are doing is we are using the content of Lung Fonds about information that for parents with children with asthma, or information for patients who have a rare lung disease. And there's a huge information source that they have available. And we are building, we call it Longmaatje 3.0, which is some kind of chat functionality using OpenAI technology, and to help them get to the right information for the right questions that they have. Of course, the content itself is about health, but it's not related to the patient itself who is interacting with the chatbot. So what you need to do is be super transparent about what do you do with the data that they enter. So it's not leaving, let's say, the conversation between the chatbot and the patient. So it's not leaving that specific moment in time, and it will never be stored related to the patient itself. And that's really important. Make sure that on the data entry side, you know what type of data it is and how you transform it, where you store it, and also for your analysis afterwards. As long as you make sure that you know where the data is and how it's processed, and you can categorize this data, then a lot is possible within the boundaries of regulation and that kind of stuff. But know your game. That's what I would say. Be on top of it.
It's similar to how it is done in the architecture, maybe also with the PISA tool that's now being discussed below. Is that I think there's also security issues, and
I believe it's what we need to be careful for. Usually with data sets in terms of sensitivity is the aspect of geolocation of data. Some governments might require you to keep your data within the boundaries of a certain country. So all of the nice things that we discussed using Microsoft Azure, in which you store it in the cloud, which might be residing wherever you want, those would crumble apart quite easily. That's one of the limitations that we encountered. Sure. Well, I've encountered it in a previous project. I believe we spoke about it before in certain 510 cases as well. So geolocation and government restrictions are main challenges in the field to overcome. So really to think about how do I process data and define your scope up front. Indeed, know the game you're playing. I think that's the golden rule. If your cause is right, and you stay within the boundaries that are typically clearly set for such proprietary data stores or data sets, then you're good to go with, and you have some freedom and some flexibility to do it. But you should be aware of what you're doing, where you're storing it.
online questions? No? So I'll hand over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. I'd like to come back on the previous point that was made about handovers. Actually, two questions. One is, can you share any experiences that you have on proper handovers to local institutions? Successful examples? That's what I'm looking for is one. And the second is, and that reflects also a little bit of an earlier discussion, is that so at one point, you know, a typical NGO ends with a program, 5-year, 3-year, whatever, and then would like to hand over. But what are your experiences with handing over and sharing the data that has been, you know, accumulated or assembled during those 5 years? Are we as a sector happy to to voluntarily share all the data we've collected so far to this handover institution that is locally there, embedded? I'd like to know your experiences about that.
Yes, I can say something. So I think the most successful handovers for us probably are the most simple solutions. So this is one thing that we in the beginning of project really need to take into account. Okay, do we need to hand over the full outcome? Does it need to be rerun later? Okay, then we really need to take into account that we use software that the people there also use. Sometimes our solution is probably some formulas in an Excel spreadsheet, because that's easy to hand over and people will be able to use it in other countries as well. For some solutions, it's not possible to do it in Excel, and we build our own software, and then it's much more difficult. But then also the discussion is very important, because then we can deliver it as software as a service, but then they need to agree to that as well, or we can give trainings where it is maybe run in their cloud. But this is always much more of a challenge. Sharing data, for us, it's not a problem, as long as like if there's personal identifiable information in it. Of course, you need approval from the people from the data, the owners of the data, in that sense. So it depends a bit on the kind of data, but if it's not PII data, then for us it's not a problem. Almost everything we make is open source, and we want to share it. But we do work together sometimes with organizations who don't openly share their data, and then it's a bit more of an issue. But in general, I think mostly at least in the humanitarian sector, people are willing to share data.
Can I ask something? Do you have a feedback loop? So do you get information back from the project on, for instance, these damage classification, so you can improve? Do you get data from the projects as well, and how does that go?
Yeah, it really depends on the project or the product. So what we also do is we try to work in or define products, so we can actually have multiple projects improving the product that we then deliver for multiple countries or contexts. And then we either do user tests ourselves in different countries, or we have another project where we talk to the same people again. It really depends on the.
But it's not on let's say more detailed data level that you, for instance, when you identify areas with a high damage percentage, that you also get information from the project itself that says, we spent most of our time in this area, so you did a great prediction. Because on site it was really the most damage that we encountered.
Not always, no. Because it's also so many different people and organizations we work with. This is not something we can standardize.
Can I say something about it?
And then we're gonna switch. So
I was thinking that
last statement for you. No problem.
No, the challenge of handover starts at the beginning, actually. So it's not that I am the recipient of the assistance of a data, or that I make the solution or co-create the solution, but I'm trying from the beginning to assess with my colleagues in African countries to see whether the offered solution or whether there's a need for a typical solution. And if it doesn't hit there, then there's no point in starting even. So it's not that here in the Netherlands we receive the solution and then bring it to Kenya and then say, hey, this is pretty nice stuff, you should use it. Which is not easier. I mean, it's not easier to do that at the beginning, but at least you try to see whether there's any interest and have them engaged with the data company here in the Netherlands, so I'm functioning more as a facilitator or as an intermediary between the recipients in the African countries who actually have to apply it. And for example, see motions with a Power BI course, and then hopefully the course gets not only fulfilled but then applied in real life, more or less. That's the first, and the second was on the data within a project, right?
It's about the willingness of sharing.
Yeah, there is so much talk in I think over a decade of how to avoid new data being collected over and over again and use data that's already there. And there are so many practical, it's not the attitude, it has nothing to do, I think people are willing to share even anonymized, even cutting out specific geographical information and give it on administrative region or something like that. But it seems very hard to apply those data sets from previous times in the new ones. Then they are too old, and there's no effort made somewhere to harbor down, apart from these data marketplaces that there are open data marketplaces. But I find it very hard to see whether I can relate the data set to my particular project. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for all the participation. Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe during drinks,
Sure.
you can ask the question. I think everybody will be around. I want to thank our panel, especially. So big applause. Then we're going to switch again. So downstairs is going to be a talk by Hein Fleuren on making impact with research on with nonprofits. So that's downstairs. And here Parvati will come and she will chair the session on our fellowship. So there will be participants from the fellowship, lecturers from the fellowship, and mentors who will be sharing their experiences. And well, for example, Claudia over there is in that panel, I think. So time to